I guess that's a very small price to pay for their historical emancipation and nation building. I mean, this is how they think. I mean, it's boggling to me. But how can we counter that? I mean, we already. I'm speaking as a Bulgarian
Hmm.
here. I'm not pretending. I'm biased in this case,
Hmm.
and obviously looking at the sources, they confirm what we believe in and what we read. It's just that how do we counter that? Like, can we counter it with veto and historical commission, or there is more ways we can fix that?
Okay, so that's a good question, especially in the age of nationalism and in the age of the post-Westphalian and Westphalian order, when you have nation states, there is this deeply rooted understanding everybody has the right to write their own history. Well, okay, there's two things that I think. First of all, we need to have an honest and intellectual conversation, which I think is happening. It is happening in a very twisted and perverted way because the other side is either avoiding or is using sort of a propaganda tools at home instead of engaging into a genuine conversation. But, in the end of the day, there's also a process of maturation of the domestic elite, where the domestic political elite has to understand that the longer this conversation drags on and on, the longer we're actually throwing at each other documents, it's the more damaging for their identity. It's not damaging for my identity, for your identity, for the identity of the Bulgarians who live in what we call now Pirin Macedonia, or in the Blagoevgrad regions, or around the globe who have Macedonian roots. Their identity is not being questioned and threatened. It's pretty stable. It's the identity of the people in what we have today, North Macedonia, who firmly believe in something that does not correspond, is not supported by documents, and accept a narrative that, frankly, is not accurate, is not reflecting the historical evidence and the consensus in world historiography. That is actually in and of itself destructive for their own national identity, because then the Macedonian public, and you're not seeing that in the public opinion polls. Oftentimes, public opinion polls are actually reflecting this cognitive dissonance. This is an initial reactions of resistance, because it creates a sense, oh, my identity is threatened, so I'm going to be more Macedonian than I am. But in the background, they're also asking the question, is this true? Is this true that these people that we read about in the textbooks actually identified themselves otherwise? And of course, when you face this cognitive dissonance, your first reaction is, I don't want to read the originals. But then somebody brings them up, whether we create a video, a podcast, something. And it's like, is this really true? I don't believe that. So they become aggressive toward it. That's the second stage of the cognitive dissonance. So denial, aggressiveness. And then after some time, because it's kind of bugging them, So that is affecting their identity. So there has to be a process of maturation, what we call it. They have to go and get mature, the political
And
elites,
that
and to
takes time, definitely.
realize,
Yeah.
yes, this is one thing. But the other thing is, yes, we have the EU membership tools. The EU membership tools were not when the Copenhagen criteria, so-called Copenhagen criteria, were created in 1993. We did not even know that Macedonia, it was literally about a year of independent Macedonia, whether it would exist as an independent Macedonia. And of course, the historical problem, we thought by then that this would be resolved by the time they get a new member. So in other words, they will get the historical facts right, because otherwise, it's damaging to their own national interest and their own national identity. And so when they wrote the Copenhagen criteria, they're very general, And now everybody in Skopje is telling you, and I'd like people, both English-speaking audience in Macedonia, around the globe, and mostly among their diaspora, to understand, well, actually, this historical forgeries, historical misrepresentations, historical revisionism that is being engaged is a part of the Copenhagen criteria. It's not a bilateral dispute. This is the essence of which we have to explain the rest of the world through all possible means and media. It hurts the core foundational principles of the membership criteria. The first criterion, which is the political criterion, it has something that it's called democratic governance, democratic rule. Democratic governance and democratic rules means exactly that, revising the textbooks that in a way that they reflect more accurately what happened in the past. I understand, and you, Georgi, will agree that every country has the right to create a narrative that serves best their own interests, and of course, if you even look at the Macedonian movement, the struggle for independent state, which ultimately leads to the creation of an independent national identity, much like in the case of Austria or Norway or Flanders. Well, Flanders is not an independent, but it's Belgian identity and multi-tiered identity. This is a normal process. We don't have a problem with that. We have a problem of how it is explained, And oftentimes I'm being asked also this question. So why is this that they had to have this narrative of denying the Bulgarian roots of many of those individuals from the 19th and 20th century, and actually, frankly, a considerable portion of the population? Why is it that they have to create this fraudulent, inaccurate narrative? And this is really the hardest question, because Austrians don't deny the connection with the German identity that they've had, and they actually use very easily the term, well, we all know that before World War I, before the creation of the modern Austrian state, they were Germans within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, not only in Austria, but also in Slovenia, all the way to Romania. They always call them Germans. They don't call them Austrians, or the Norwegians in the same way. Oftentimes in the early stages, we see that those processes were going parallel with the Danish, Danish crown. The people in Flanders, oftentimes, they were part of the once upon a time Kingdom of the Netherlands. They were part of, subject of wars and so on. But there was this connection. They're not denying this connection. So why was Macedonia denying this connection? And the answer that I have is very simple. Listen. Once you have the people who created the narrative, they were not very smart. Ivan Dinev was one of those people who did that. And I'm sorry to say that, but these are the people who created the narrative. And it's sad. Second, this narrative was created in a totalitarian society, communist Bulgaria, but also communist Yugoslavia. And third,
speaking about the narrative,
communist Yugoslavia had this is something that our viewers have to understand. Communist Yugoslavia had a vested interest in having anti-Bulgarian rhetoric. Their major security concern was that if the population in Macedonia, even though they might have felt different now, had accurate understanding about their past and the connection that exists with Bulgaria, they were worried that under certain circumstances, particularly with the Tito-Stalin clash in the Cold War, potentially, if a conflict erupts between Yugoslavia and Bulgaria, and that conflict was very much likely, or there was a serious concern about that conflict all the way since the creation of Yugoslavia, since the end of World War I, throughout the Cold War, because we know that during the Cold War, two countries shared ideology but had very conflicting. So they were very worried that if Bulgarian army enters, then in Macedonia, Bulgarian army might very well enjoy support, much like it did during the First and, frankly, the Second World War. So it was very important to create a sense of identity in the public that completely, totally denies the existence of this connection with Bulgaria, with the Bulgarian people and the Bulgarian historical narrative, Unfortunately, of course, it served well the Yugoslav interests of the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and 80s. But now it actually serves against the EU interests. This is because the EU interest is to bring the peoples together. You can't have a narrative that divides the people. You can't have a narrative that creates a conflict. This is anti-EU. This is against the fundamentals of the EU. This undermines the very process of EU integration. And this is what we need to explain the public. Georgi, go ahead about historical narratives you wanted to.